had a lottery that he had campaigned on, and he told me how he was going to ruin my political career and hurt my business if I didn't support his lottery. So right then, I knew that we needed to have some change in state government. Long story short, I was part of a team to recruit then Congressman Riley to run for governor. He did. So we had a Republican governor in place, beat the incumbent. And it was very clear that even though we had a great governor, and I believe he's the most successful governor we have ever had, he served 2 terms in terms of economic development and bringing honesty and integrity back to the governor's office, every one of his legislative proposals was dead on arrival as soon as it arrived across the street. Dead. Couldn't even bring them up in committee because we had Democrat control. I became the minority leader, served as minority leader for 6 years, and what we basically did was just kill bad things. We killed attempts to raise taxes. We killed attempts to try to bring more government, make government bigger. So we got pretty good where we were killing things. It was very frustrating because we couldn't do anything. So I told the story earlier about Governor Riley calling me into his office and asking me to run for party chairman. And I did that. It doesn't pay anything. I've gotten real good at taking these jobs and burning about 90% of the time and making money at it. But it was a great opportunity to really change the direction of the state of Alabama. And changing the legislature was no small task. Again, it had been in serious control for 50 years by the teachers union and the trial lawyers, and had been in Democrat control since Reconstruction, back when the Republicans in Alabama were bad guys. So,
Mr. Speaker,
yes.
When did it go from who ran it before 50 years ago? What year did the teachers union become the major player and the trial lawyers? Same time or different?
The teachers union really came into power in the 1940s and early 50s, and the trial lawyers about the same time. You know, before that, it was really a one-party state. There were no Republicans in Alabama. It was either conservative Democrats or Democrats, and now we're almost to a one-party system where it's all Republican. It's amazing how it shifted. But changing the legislature was a big deal. The teachers union and Paul Hubbard figured out decades ago that if you controlled the Alabama legislature, you control state government. They didn't get involved in gubernatorial races, congressional races, any constitutional officers, judicial races. Everything they had was focused on the legislature.
Is the governor considered a weak executive by position? Is most of the power in the legislature?
Most of the power is in the legislature.
So when it comes to appropriations and so forth, they control the strings. It's not the
legislature
executive
controls the policy and the purse strings. So if you control the legislature, you control everything. And
can the governor refuse to spend money that's been appropriated, or is it required for him to spend the money?
It's required to spend the money. So legislature has a big stick. And to override a governor's veto is a simple majority. So I mean, a veto is nothing. I mean, when I was in the minority, Governor Riley would veto, and I mean, it was just override one after the other.
Is there any other state that has a simple majority override?
You know, I don't know. And we used to talk about wanting to change that, but now that we're in the majority, we kind of like it. So we may just keep it that way. We actually did override the Republican governor's veto this year. But
what was it that he vetoed that you overrode?
It was a school start date bill, which was something that we passed because it would make a uniform time for schools to start. We did it really for tourism, and just felt like it made sense, kind of a trial run at it. For some reason, he vetoed it. It was an overwhelming override. But when I became party chairman, I just felt like that the only way that we could take the majority was for an entity like the Alabama Republican Party to take ownership of the campaign. I mean, for years it had been where you would just hope that the right people signed up to run for the legislature, and it became clear that most normal people don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I think I'm going to run for the Alabama legislature, which means I'm not normal. But we had to actually go out and recruit, and actually Tim Howe, who was here as a former ED of the party, actually we hired him and he did our recruiting for us, and we did very scientifically. We picked out the districts where we could win. We looked at trends, and we sent Tim into those districts to go and talk to the movers and shakers in town, spend several weeks up there, say, give me some names of some people. We were looking for people who had never run for office before, who had never thought about running for office before, who were small business owners, professionals, private sector people. And we recruited them. We put a hardcore press on it. We bring in Governor Riley in to close the deal. I traveled all over the state after he identified some folks, and I would lie to them, do whatever it took to get them to run. And,
Sure, I am
they
recording
lied
this.
to me. No, we didn't lie to them. We did tell them how important, and they could be a part of something. They could be a part of something very, very special, and explained why we needed to change the direction of the state. So we were successful in doing that. So no longer did we just hope that the right people showed up. We recruited them to run, and then we brought them in individually. We had teams put together where we did their polling, where we got economies of scale. Jimmy McLaughlin did our polling for us. We did their mail. We did their opposition research for them, because most of these folks had never run for office. They didn't know anything about that. We had a coordinated campaign platform, kind of like the contract with America. We called it the Republican Handshake with Alabama. And we told the people of Alabama, if you put us in charge for the first time in 136 years, these are the issues that we will take up first and foremost. And it was interesting because 4 years prior, the Democrats had come up with something they called a Covenant for the Future. 19 different bills that they said they would pass within the first 10 legislative days of the first year of the quadrennium. 4 years later, they had passed 3, and despite having a majority in every committee chairman, they had passed 3, and most of them had never even been introduced. So it was obviously hollow campaign promise. And we told people about that. And I'm proud to say that once we took over, we didn't do anything in the House of Representatives until we passed every one of our Republican handshake bills. We did it within the first 10 days of the legislative session. And we even had newspaper articles and columns written about us, and I don't think they liked anything that we did. There was a newspaper called the Anniston Star in Anniston, Alabama. We call it the Red Star. It is about as left as you can get. They wrote an editorial and said, we hate everything these guys did, but we really do appreciate the fact that they did what they said they were going to do. You know, that never has happened. So we have really worked to change the culture of Montgomery. But back to the campaign, we ran everything very scientifically. We stayed on course. We had some setbacks. We had some special elections that we lost. We learned from those. We also learned that we didn't continue to put money into races where we weren't going to win. So we were very smart about it. And again, the prize was always on taking over the legislature. And we were obviously involved in other races, but our #1 priority was the legislature, because it was the last bastion of Democratic control in the entire government of Alabama. So we were able to raise the money needed. My job was the fundraiser in chief. I've got a chapter in here called Fundraiser in Chief. That's what I did. I went all around the state. When you're asking people for $40,000, we created a new level called the Governor's Circle, and actually went and talked to people and said, look, if you will give us $10,000 a year for 4 years, here is what we will do. We will run a coordinated campaign. We will recruit candidates. None of the money is going to be spent on any overhead. There are no salaries. I actually put $40,000 of my own money in it, not for my campaign, but my own money, as did my finance chairman, who is a state senator. He's now the president pro tem of the Senate. And you know, we really couldn't show them any results. We just made a promise to them. Here's what we're going to do. And we talked about the fact that you know, Governor Riley had been such a great governor, but just imagine what we could have done if every one of his legislative proposals was not dead on arrival. And we were able to convince people to invest in it. And you can't imagine how hard that is, being in the minority, because they knew that the majority was going to see that they were contributing to us and there could be retribution. There was certainly retribution against me, but I was doing my job trying to get us into the majority. And
How many individuals did you find to make that commitment?
How many?
The 40,000?
104.
And,
We had 104 people do that.
And how does that stack up to what had been done over the previous 10 years in
Well,
terms of major
the
donors?
most that the party had ever raised in an election cycle was $350,000. So we raised a little over $4 million with just the Governor's Circle. And then, of course, we had other levels. We had dinners and other fundraising that we did. We ended up raising about $5.5 million. And but I put together a great team, which is outlined in the book, young people, but there's absolutely committed to accomplishing this goal and changing the state of Alabama forever.
How have you done in urban areas, in, you know, mayors races, city councils, that kind of thing?
Well, those are nonpartisan elections in the mayoral and city council races, but county commissioners are Republican versus Democrat. And you know, since we made the switch on November 2nd, 2010, we have had, gosh, it's dozens and dozens of county office holders, county commissioners, sheriffs, school board members switching parties. There's one county, Covington County, in South Alabama, which had been a majority Democrat county. As a matter of fact, the previous speaker before me, the Democrat, had held the speakership for 12 years, and he had not sought re-election. That seat went to Republican, and now they just had the elections in the primary. There were no Democrats on the ballot in Covington County, period, for any race. So we've just gone through redistricting, which is very, very important. First time that we have ever been in control during redistricting. What we did, we finished it up last week, what we did is we just drew the lines fairly. And that's all we ask. So we're not going to try to do anything politically, we just want them to be fair, and all the districts to have the same population. And so we adhered to 1% deviation, which 10 years ago the Democrats had done 5% deviation. They packed Republicans into districts to make us waste our votes. I actually had a member who had to give up 30,000 people in his district. That's almost a House district. House district's 45,000. So you saw some districts go away that were Democrats and moved into Republican areas. Wasn't done for partisan reasons, although we didn't complain. It's just because it's a true reflection of the population. Under Justice Department rules, we're under the Voting Rights Act, which you know, is really annoying that we have to submit things to the Justice Department on anything we do for them to approve it, which you know, we really resent.
Has the state ever tried to or approach DOJ about withdrawal? Yep. What was the last time they did that, actually?
I think it was last year. Tried to do it last year, and they can't point to anything that we have done wrong. But I think they like to keep us under their thumb.
Could a Republican Justice Department agree to that?
Yes, they could.
And they never have? Under all the years of Republican Justice Department?
There was a Democrat legislature that wouldn't have sought that.
I guess I wasn't just thinking about
That was
Alabama.
only 2 years.
Other states.
Well,
I don't know that anyone's asked, but then
that's something
everything's
that
radioactive.
we're
No one
certainly
wants
going
to
to
touch
be asking for, because it's absolutely absurd for us to have to adhere to that, as do other southern states, still being punished for things that happened 50 years ago. But under the DOJ regulations, we can't have what's called retrogression, so we can't go backwards in terms of majority-minority districts. Even though the population probably doesn't justify them having that many majority-minority districts, we can't go backwards. We had 27 majority-minority districts in the House, and the way we drew the lines, it actually ended up with 28. So they can't accuse us of doing anything to diminish minority voting. But you can imagine if Republican districts are growing and we can't go backwards in terms of majority-minority districts, the only thing to go are white Democrats. And that's just the way it is. And we were accused of actually doing that on purpose, but like, look, I mean, there's nothing else you can do. It is what it is. So I believe that we will actually grow. We ended up the night on the election night with 62 Republican House members. The next day we had 4 party switchers, so we got to 66. And I believe that we will pick up another 3 or 4 seats during the 2004 elections.
Yeah, I moved to Alabama in 2004, and one thing I noticed about the legislature is it seemed like the Democratic leadership for a long time was very good at kind of raising a lot of symbolic issues, holding symbolic votes, so members representing conservative districts kind of could run around and say they were voting conservative. How the Republicans kind of counter that?
Well, we just exposed them, and it's our fault. We had never called them on it. We had never had a coordinated campaign to where we had the resources and we would call them on it. We allowed Democrats to go back into their districts and act one way in their districts and act another way in Montgomery. We called it the Tom Daschle syndrome. And we called them on it, and there's nothing they could do. I mean, they cried when we did it. There was a guy named Jeff McLaughlin in Marshall County, and we just put up his voting records, and he accused us of being mean and saying mean things about him. Like, as a matter of fact, the tagline, because he was a real popular guy, and it's in the book, and the tagline we came up on everything we did was Jeff McLaughlin, a nice guy in Gunnersville, a liberal in Montgomery, and we defeated him. We actually ran 24 races. We won 22 of them in the House, and we did the same thing in the Senate. My counterpart, who was the finance chairman, who's now the President Pro Tem, kind of took the lead on the Senate side, but we did it in a coordinated fashion.
I've never understood this dynamic in the South where it turned sort of from the top. And, you know, so for a long time it was Republican at the national level, but then you still had this total control. You know, what happened there? Why didn't it switch more completely, more quickly?
Well, maybe follow on to that is what about voter registration? I mean, what process, what role did you play in that? And do you have like a time frame, like over the last 10, 15, 20 years, what those numbers look like? Where did that, I mean, because I use South Carolina as the barometer under Carroll Campbell and how he went from a Dem majority to a Republican majority state with registration.
We had a political director that I hired named Michael Joffrion, who's an Auburn grad. He's now working, he's heading up the North Carolina effort for Mitt Romney. He was a regional political director during the primary. We ran the most, well, it was the most expensive and the most coordinated get out the vote campaign in the history of the Republican Party. It included voter registration. And what we did was we targeted the races where we were trying to turn folks out to win in the legislative races. We actually identified the voters who were soft voters. We knew that if we could get them to the polls, they would vote for us, but they didn't have a real high propensity to go and vote. So we touched them 6 times. Every voter, we touched them 6 times, either by knocking on doors, by mail, radio, phone calls. We would touch them. And so we knew who they were, and actually afterwards, there was a 10% increase in turnout in the districts where we ran our program.
Wow.
And we worked very, very hard at the voter registration and also our door knockers. We were sophisticated where we had the Blackberries, and if someone said, absolutely, I'm going to vote for Barry Moore versus Terry Spicer, we sent that information and went to our computer, we tagged that person, we knew we had harassed that person to make sure they got out to vote. So we were very, very sophisticated when it comes to that.
But you made a comment, you said we called them, we called the Democrats. What did you encounter with the major media sources? We find in Maryland they commit what I refer to as acts of deception through omission, where they leave out critical facts that recolor the situation. How did you deal with that?
You know, we had a pretty good relationship with the media. I had a great communications director who's now the chief of staff for the President Pro Tem. You know, we gained a good relationship with them because we never lied to them. We were honest to them, honest with them. We would give them kind of some behind-the-scenes information. So I think they were fair, but the way we called them on it mainly was with our campaign information, direct mail, radio, television, and of course we had a whole new media campaign with email and Facebook and all the stuff that I don't even understand. But we put a lot of resources into that. The other thing that's interesting is that, and this kind of came about by accident, but we were testing in the polling, you know, did people think that we were in control or the Democrats were in control? And we found out that more people thought that Republicans were in control of the legislature. I guess because we had the governor, he was a Republican, both of our senators, 5 of 7, now it's 6 of 7 congressmen are Republicans. And so that kind of confounded us. How do we change that around? So then we asked a question: if you knew that the Democrats have been in charge of the Alabama legislature for 136 years, would you be more or less likely to vote to put the Republicans in charge? Like 83% of the people said more likely to vote for Republicans. So we were brainstorming one day about how do we do this, and finally somebody came up with the idea and said, what if we just said 136 years is long enough? And so we came up with that, so we put billboards up. 136 years is long enough. We put www.136years.com. And people were going, 136 years, what is that? They go to the website. We had, it's actually on the book here, had yard signs that people put in the yards. 136 years is long enough, bumper stickers. And then we came out with the second phase of it. 136 years is long enough, you know, time to give the Republicans a chance. And it worked. And even the Democrat chairman, who was my counterpart, actually we're both from Auburn, he actually says in the book that that was a very, very effective campaign because people wanted to change it around. They didn't like, I mean, the legislature is kind of like Congress. I mean, the approval rating is not very good. It's going up now, thankfully, but it was in the tank. And we found out that people thought that we were in charge.
If you look at the funding for Democrats running for the State House and the State Senate over the last decade, what percentage is trial lawyers, what percentage is labor unions, what is other?
Oh, I would say 75–80% came from the teachers union. I mean, it is very effective, and we've taken some steps to change that. Teachers union, they collect $3 a month from every union member to go into their PAC that the taxpayers pay for. I mean, they did it through payroll deduction. It went to their political action committee. $3 a month times 100,000 members times 12 months times 4 years, because again, they didn't play in any other races. I mean, they're just a juggernaut to deal with. They spent $500,000 on me in 2006, knowing that they weren't going to beat me. They just did it because they could and just deep with me. You know, they had unlimited money. We actually passed in our ethics legislation to make it illegal to collect campaign and PAC contributions through public sources. So that's they appealed it, and actually the federal court sent it back to the state Supreme Court to make the ruling. And we have 9 of 9 Supreme Court justices, so I'm hoping that they will rule in our favor.
Speaker, going back to Lyndon Johnson and even beyond that, Southern politicians have been the greatest fundraisers in America. For the last 20 years, pound for pound, the best fundraiser in national politics is Richard Shelby. He raises more than
He likes it.
He does. He enjoys the art of fundraising, and he raises more than $3 a head, which, if he were running for president, would put him on the order of $900 million raised. I'm wondering, when you began this process of upping your fundraising efforts, was he helpful?
He was. Not at first, but I went and visited with every member of our delegation. Mike Rogers, who's a congressman, is a good friend of mine. He was actually the minority leader before me, and actually predicted that I was worthy to be speaker. So that came true. I got him to write the foreword for the book. Every member of our delegation, Spencer Backus, Robert Adderholt, Mike, Joe Bonner, they all immediately jumped in and said, we're going to do $40,000. And so did Jeff Sessions. I mean, I couldn't even get through my pitch before Senator Sessions says I'm in. Quick story, and this is not in the book. I went to see Richard Shelby. And of course, he showed me his office. He was in John Kerry's old office, and sat down, and I had a big book of our plan. This is the campaign 2010 plan. I want to show you that this is not going to be just money that you're throwing away. Here's how we're going to spend it. So he said, well, what can I do? I said, I need $1 million. You give me $1 million. He had $19 million in his campaign account. So I said, $1 million, and we can get this done. And before I could get it out of my mouth, he stood up, and the meeting was over. But he did send us $100,000. So he was helpful. And he also helped some individual candidates. So I'm not going to say anything bad about $100,000, but I was hoping for $1 million.
I don't think there's a senator in the country that has $19 million in the bank account.
No, and it's Alabama, not New York or
I
California.
was going to say, not New York, not California.
No, but he's
Senator
chairman
Shelby.
of the banking committee, so he fundraises in North Carolina and New York for a lot of the banking.
He's
also
very
sits
good
on
at it. And
appropriations.
like I said, most of us don't like fundraising, but he enjoys it.
No, it's
his
a
hobby.
test of his manhood.
It's
Yeah.
his hobby. But, that's one of the worst things about being in office is having to raise money. But it was very clear when I came into the chairmanship, we were $144,000 in debt. And we had some things that we had to clear up, and it was clear that if we did not have the resources, then we could never be competitive, and that's why we came up with such an aggressive campaign. It's interesting, when we first came up with our concept, and it was really kind of like a capital campaign, like you would go, like if you were a university. You go and you would say, okay, will you pledge this? I asked them to sign a pledge card and the whole deal. I was a member of the RNC by virtue of being the party chairman. And we sent up the plan and talked about the plan with the RNC, and they came back and said it was the stupidest thing that they had ever seen, that it was not going to work. You couldn't do political fundraising like that. Because one of the things we told people is if you give us $40,000, we're not going to ask you for another dime. Because something I noticed is we just kept hitting the same people over and over and over, just dinking them here and dinking them there. You ticket for $100. So we're not going to do it. You're going to be invited to everything that we do. And you're not going to get another piece of mail from the Alabama Republican Party. Of course, the RNC said that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. I said, no, I think it'll work. And we invited all the members of the governor's circle to come to our dinners. Most of them didn't come, and they would have not come, so it didn't cost us anything, but it made them really feel good about being a member of the governor's circle. We had Minda Riley Campbell, who's Governor Riley's daughter, who would keep them informed and write emails, and Governor Riley would call and talk to the folks. And keep in mind, Governor Riley was helping us immensely, but it was not going to benefit from it. He was term limited out. So he was not going to be able to serve as governor with a Republican majority in the legislature, but he understood the importance of doing that. I cannot tell you how important it was for him to help us. And he did it totally unselfishly just because he wanted